Welcome back to Risky Business, a show about making better decisions. I'm Maria Konnikova.
And I'm Nate Silver.
So today on the show, we've got a very special guest with us, a poker legend, Poker Hall of Famer, 10-time World Series of Poker bracelet winner. As of now, we are recording this in May. We are airing this during the World Series of Poker. So by the time you hear this, he might be at number 11, given the speed at which he acquires them. World Poker Tour title holder, EPT title holder, Triple Crown winner, basically every title that exists he has, high roller extraordinaire. Welcome to the show, Erik Seidel.
That's a very generous intro.
Well, and of course, Erik's greatest claim to fame is teaching me how to play poker.
It is.
So Erik, let's, we're going to talk a lot of poker and risk and all of that, but why don't we start off by just kind of going back to the beginning, to, little Erik growing up. How did your interest in games and in poker even originate? How did you even get introduced to that world? Were you someone who was curious about it from a young age? Is it something that came later?
Yeah, I started playing backgammon when I was in high school, and that led me to a place called the Game Room, which was on the Upper West Side, and then ended up going to the Mayfair, which was a well-known backgammon and bridge club in those days, and played backgammon there for years, and a poker game ended up developing in the Mayfair. At the time, they didn't allow any pros in, which was very helpful to me because I was terrible. So I got to play with other people who were also terrible. And I would say it just slowly started to take over the Mayfair and become, eventually the Mayfair ended up being a poker club.
Erik, so you kind of sort of played games professionally in the sense that, paid the bills, but then you had a little detour and you went to Wall Street, which is gambling of a much gamblier nature than poker, I would say. Talk a little bit about kind of how your background in games prepared you for that and how you ended up then transitioning back and playing poker full time, leaving Wall Street for a career that, many people would say, what are you doing?
I do think it was a natural transition to go from playing games to Wall Street. And you see a lot of poker players now going onto Wall Street. But while I was working on Wall Street, I was also flying out to play cash games in Vegas. So I didn't like being on Wall Street. I didn't like having to wear a tie and, just standing there. There's a competitive and a pettiness there that I didn't like, trading on the floor where people are fighting for ones and twos. And it was, it's kind of an ugly environment. And I really didn't like being part of it. I just felt like to be rewarded trading options on the floor, you really need to be a dick, and try and screw people over. And that was what was being done to me. And it didn't feel good.
To our listeners might think, boy, isn't poker kind of cutthroat? But there's like a kind of camaraderie among players most of the time. And Erik, you played in like some of the biggest, most famous games of all time. I mean, has that camaraderie lessened over the years as you kind of have more tourists and professionals? Or, I mean, what was the scene like when you're kind of young skinny kid, I guess, and trying to get your feet wet in Vegas, which you don't yet know that well?
I mean, it was fine because I knew enough people. And the nice thing about poker is now it's changed a little bit where there are more private games in Vegas. But in those days, all the games were open, and that was kind of part of the law, is that you got to play if you wanted to. And so, it was competitive, but it was never unfriendly. It can be exhausting, but I also really enjoy the environment. I like rooting for friends and things like that.
In terms of thinking about decision making and risk taking in really high stakes situations and under bright lights, right? When people are looking and people are watching how you're playing, because these days, I know in the past this wasn't the case, but these days they're all streamed, right? So people know exactly how you're making decisions. How do you deal with that, right? How do you keep executing at a high level after you've been playing for multiple days? You're tired, everyone's watching, and the stakes are so high because the payouts keep going and going up and the pay jumps are huge. And I feel like this is one of the things that might be the most applicable to real life, because I think people always want to know, how do I make good risk decisions when the stakes are the highest?
If you're playing a tournament, one of the nice things about a tournament is that the further you go along, the more that's at stake. And I think that's helpful because now you're really rewarded for paying attention and bringing focus. And so, I mean, I do think sometimes I have to remind myself to get back to just being present and being watching the action, stuff like that. But it does, to me, it is easier as you get closer to a final table or you get closer to a win, because there's just more at stake, and it's just it becomes more interesting.
That's really interesting. Nate, do you find that as well, just in poker and in life? Because I think it's true of me in a certain respect that as the pressure builds, you actually perform better, right? Because there are different people. There are people who can't perform under pressure, and then there are people who do their best at high stakes moments. And it seems like Erik is the high stakes performer. I'd like to think that I am too. How do you see it, Nate?
I mean, I think you've made more deep runs in the past couple of years than I have, Maria. No, I have felt increasingly comfortable when the pressure does mount, especially in weaker fields, right? We're okay, if I've made day threes a couple dozen times in my life, and this is their second time, then I'm inexperienced relative to a lot of people. But you've been through that a little bit before. It also helps, I think. I like when events are on TV, because even though it adds some annoyances, like what am I wearing, how do I look, I think it puts more pressure on other people by comparison. Because I'm not sure if people do better under pressure or that they do less bad than they choke less than others, right? But yeah, look, I mean, Erik, how do you stay sharp, right? Because let's say you're having a mediocre World Series, and then finally after 6 weeks, right, you just barrel through a tournament, a big event, right? You're the chip leader, it's on to day 4 or something. I mean, what's your routine like during the series to pace yourself or stay sharp or all the above?
Well, I mean, at the World Series, it's really just you're playing, you're eating, you're going to sleep. So there's no, I mean, there aren't really, you just have to avoid distractions. It's funny because every year it comes around and you think oh, good, so-and-so is going to be in town. Hopefully I'll get to have dinner with them or whatever. And it's always a mistake to think that way, because it's such an all-immersive thing that if you're not playing, you're in recovery. And every day it goes like that for the whole World Series, 6 or 7 weeks. Maria's smart because she takes a few days off and she'll go take a little mini vacation. I think that really helps. But
I do always do that before the main event, because it really helps clear my mind and get me out of any funk that I might be in. I find that that's very useful. And Erik, one of the things that I love, not just about the World Series, but just about your approach to poker in general, is that you're one of the only players I've met who is okay to end up missing an event that you had planned on playing, right? That you actually, in some ways, obviously you're incredibly competitive, but in some ways, you don't have ego in the moments where it matters, and you're okay to say, you know what, I'm not feeling up for it, or this field looks terrible. And even though I planned on playing this, $100,000 buy-in or whatever it is, I'm not going to do that. And most players, they'd feel their ego bruised, right? They're like, no, I can compete, in this, I'm going to play. How are you thinking about those moments? Because, that takes a lot of self-knowledge and discipline to do that.
Well, yeah, I also have a no suffering rule. So if I wake up and I'm just, and I'm tired, I just won't play. I just, if I'm dragging, I don't want to be unhappy at the table. So and especially at an event like the World Series where there are just so many events every day. And you have to be very conscious of what kind of energy you can bring.
No suffering rule. That's amazing. I think we should all implement that in life, right? If you wake up and you feel like this is going to be suffering, you just say no.
Yeah, exactly.
Are you trying to bracelet max? Are you trying to compete with Phil Hellmuth and people?
No, I mean, I'm not one of those guys. I don't play as many tournaments as the guys who are bracelet hunting. I feel like I have enough bracelets. I don't really have to chase them anymore. And it's also like, it's one of these things where if you win one, it's some kind of mini miracle, and you can't. For me, I don't know. I just don't like to think that way. I just want to play. Like for instance, this summer there's some cool tournaments at the Wynn, and I'll be playing those. Which are not bracelet events. But just, it's nice to play at the Wynn, and they run good tournaments. So
Nate, 10 bracelets. Do we think that's enough? I think we need to.
I think we 13 baker's dozen. Let's not be. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Erik, was there a moment when, maybe it's during the moneymaker boom, is there a moment when you're like, poker has changed, all these Europeans are coming in, or when were there like inflection points that you remember?
Well, the main one really is computers coming into the game, and that's really changed things over the last, 8 years. Or I'm not sure how long it's been, but it has changed everything. I have a friend who jokes with me that I've been telling him that the game is too tough for 30 years, and then I have to stop. But really, more recently, the computers have made it a much greater challenge. But it's still, it's made it more difficult for me to play, but it's also made it more interesting, and it's fun to play against these computer guys, and also to see how much the game has evolved. So I enjoy being part of that, and trying to figure things out in this more modern computerized world.
Yeah, and you're still succeeding, right? At EPT Monte Carlo, you came in third in one of the high rollers. You won several of your bracelets in the last few years. So clearly you're still able to compete at a high level. Do you, how do you prepare, not just for the World Series, but for series in general? Do you work with solvers? Kind of what does your study routine look like, and has it changed significantly over the years?
Yeah, it's definitely changed a lot. It used to be you didn't really have to do anything. You just showed up and played, which was really nice. It was a different time, and almost nobody studied. There were some books, but the books really weren't that relevant to playing. And it was nice back then when you could just show up and play. It's, I think that there are people now who are completely immersed in it, who are studying and playing, and that's kind of all they do. It's, it creates, an extra challenge to go up against people like that. But it's also, it's interesting and exciting, and it's, it's fun. Like I always sit down and I think, it's so cool to be playing with, I feel like I'm as much a fan as I am a player. And, I'll sit down at a table and I'll be like, wow, these guys are just so good. This is really fun,
Well, that's great. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why you're still so good, right? Is because you are, it's the ego thing again. You're learning from others, and you're kind of incorporating it into your game. I remember one hand. So a few years ago, I think it was Poker Go released some of the archives from like the earliest World Series events, and they had some footage from 1988. So the famous World Series where you came in second to Johnny Chan, and they had footage of just the final table before you guys were heads up. And I still remember you just going bananas with a small pocket pair, right? There was like a raise and a call, and you had, I think it was pocket fours, and you just like ripped it. So talk about, first of all, fearlessness, and secondly, no one was doing that, right? Like these days, you know that these make actually really good bluffs, but if you were looking at people's game back then, that was just absolutely not done. You were, so I'm very curious for, obviously you were young and, you would say young and stupid. I'd say, young and fearless. But those plays, like where did that come from? Was that just intuition, patterns? Like do you remember how you thought of doing things that nobody had done before?
I do remember I was very focused on reads and things like that. And I was pretty reckless. I think, especially, if you talk about 1988, I didn't really know what I was doing, and I was really, but I do remember feeling like this is really fun because you get reads from some of these players that I wasn't getting in the game back in New York, and it was very exciting for me to think, wow, I can play with these people, and I didn't have any experience outside of New York, and
Were the reads back then obvious, or it's just that you have a knack for picking that up, or more experience, or are people better about avoiding tells now?
Yeah, I think they were more obvious back then, and I think people were less concerned about timing and patterns and things like that. So it was just everybody was kind of playing by the seat of their pants back then. So there really were a lot of opportunities. And also, I just when you don't know what you're doing, you can really push things pretty far.
Let's say it's the first day of the main event. I assume you like the main event, Eric. You're not one of these.
I love the main event. I hope I can play it every single year. I really get a kick out of it.
It's day one. Maybe you have some media trailing you, but assume everyone knows who you are at the table, right? How are you adjusting to that, right? To being a known person where there might be some intimidation factor. There are thousands of hours of you playing poker on tape, right? How do you adjust to, say, like a rank amateur playing against you versus like a nervous kid who looks up to you versus like another pro?
I just try and play. I mean, I'm trying to play against each person individually, but I don't really feel like any kind of reputation or anything like that is gonna be helpful. It's like I don't feel like there are those types of exploits where people will be more reluctant to play a hand with me because they perceive me to be a good player or well known or whatever. I think if anything, they might be more likely to play a hand because it's kind of fun for them to have a story to tell the people back home. So they might be a little bit more likely to try and bluff me, that kind of thing. But I try and play it, as straight as possible.
So in some ways, you've become Johnny Chan in Rounders, where Matt Damon just wants to bluff you to be able to say that he bluffed Johnny Chan.
I think that exists. I really do think that exists. I remember being at a table with a world champion in a big tournament, and a guy raised him, and he moved all in, and he said to the guy, "Don't you want to, play against the world champion?" And the guy ended up calling, and it was so ridiculous. But I do think that goes through some people's minds. I think it does. It probably raises the risk that somebody's going to try and bluff you, and I think that even if it's televised, it's even more dramatic. I think people don't want to be seen as somebody who's being bluffed on TV, and if they can bluff you on TV, then they have then they can go back and be a hero in their own game.
How much impact was there for you from losing the Immortalized by Rounders heads-up match against Johnny Chan? Was that like, were you still happy the next morning because you got fucking second place, or was it like, do you have like lifelong regret from it, or where are you on that spectrum?
The funny thing about that is that to me, that's still one of my favorite tournaments ever, just because I was somebody that I was really at the very beginning of my career, and I had no idea how my skills would be applied at the World Series. I had a couple of people in the game that encouraged me to go, but I had no confidence that I was going to be a favorite in the World Series or that I could go deep. And to have that experience of going through those 4 days and trying to outplay people and the whole thing. I mean, it was amazing for me. I just I loved that tournament. I still have great feelings about that. I mean, I also don't really feel like the fact that I lost is any really real. It's not really a big deal. You win tournaments and you lose them. I don't. I really have good feelings about how each day of that tournament, how fun it was to see, like, hey, I'm playing with these guys and I'm doing well, and I'm seeing some fun things. I'm seeing, I'm finding some creative plays that, because you're just making things up as you go along. And I think for me, at least, I was discovering a lot of things, at that time.
Well, I think that is a wonderful note to go out on, because that is kind of a peak accomplishment, even though you did not end up winning that bracelet. But I'm sure that a lot of poker players are listening to this, and aspiring poker players. The first question I ever asked you, I'm gonna end the interview with it, which is, if you could tell one thing, kind of one piece of advice for poker players who are either starting out or at any point in their journey, what would it be?
Well, I remember I told you, pay attention, and I still think that applies, because there's so much information. I feel like people are teaching you how to beat them if you just pay enough attention to their patterns and what they're doing. So if you're paying enough attention, then that's a big exploit.
I think that those are wise words and very difficult. So phone bans, yay.
I want to ask you one question about my co-host. When you were coaching Maria, when did you think that she had real potential for the game?
Maria was an exciting project. I mean, just because she came from nowhere. She didn't know how many cards were in a deck. But I think what happened with her was she just worked so hard, and so that's the key to how successful she was. Is she was interested, she was open-minded, and she was willing to put the work in. And for me, it's really thrilling to see that she's still playing. I really get a kick out of the fact that she's still playing and still doing well, and continues to do well. So it's fun to sweat her.
Well, thank you for your time today, and thank you for your time throughout our entire relationship, because you have given me more hours of your life than anyone has any right to ask for. So thank you for joining us. This was an absolute pleasure.
Pleasure's all mine. I'm a fan of the pod.
Thank you, Erik.
Friend of the pod. Nate likes to call people friends of the pod. So thank you, friend of the pod, Erik Seidel.
All right. That's a big upgrade. I like it.